Anyway, and how is the pandemic there? Are you in Denver?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, and how is everything there now?
It's kind of like this weird, like everybody's just pretending that it's not happening anymore. But the numbers speak for themselves, and it's just about as bad as it's ever been. Wow. But but at the same time, there's like shows going on, and restaurants are open, and bars and everything, and so you kind of are allowed to do whatever you feel comfortable with.
Yeah, and
for better or for worse,
Yeah, when it comes to vaccination rates, are they okay there? What's the situation there as well?
They haven't been bad. I think we're somewhere around like 70% or something, which is good. But, I think we're kind of getting to the point where like we need to be getting boosters now, and they're not like really protecting us as well as they were. And, there's still like a huge, especially certain counties in Colorado where, the vaccination rates are really low because people are just ideologically opposed to them. So, I don't know. It's kind of a weird dynamic right now.
Yeah, it's the same here in Portugal, even though like our vaccination rate overall in the country, I think it's now 90%. So,
oh, wow.
So we're starting with the boosters now. And for the elderly, that's where they're starting the boosters with. So, I think it's good. And, I just can't wait to be back to freaking normal, whatever that normal is anyway.
Me too.
It's crazy. And let's talk about Camis, Deceiver, the new record. You guys, again, not that you're surprised because, you always been in a crescendo with the last records. And this one, again, really hits the nail in the head. It's a great record.
Thank you.
Love listening to it. How was the songwriting process? What song did kind of was the catalyst for these records?
It's funny, like we started working on the record at the end of 2019, before shit really hit the fan. And we had started with what the first song on the album is, Vernal Gate. And so we sort of had like a framework for that song, which ended up, the only thing that ended up staying was like the sort of at the gates sounding riff that like kicks things off once the acoustic guitars stop. So that kind of gave us like a little bit of a idea of what the feeling for the record could be, that like maybe we could push like sort of like the melodic death influence a little bit harder than we have in the past. And like maybe do like some more of like we're all like big fans of death and black metal, and like we've always had like little elements of that peppered throughout, but like it just sort of made us feel like, okay, we can like kind of push these influences a little bit further on this record and not have it not sound like us. It's still going to sound like Khemmis. So we sort of like got in that mindset from that, but then that was really like the only thing that we worked on that ended up sticking before, the whole world shut down. And so we were sort of faced with this dilemma in 22 of like, how do we record, or how do we write a new album if we can't get together? And like, what is the point of the new album? Like, do we really have like a good reason to be doing it? And I think we all ended up just having to question sort of like whether Khemmis was an important enough part of our lives to keep it going and to make another record, whether our lives were an important enough aspect of our lives to sort of keep it going. We were all like dealing with, I think, quite a bit of depression, and it was making it really hard to feel creative or feel like we had a voice that was meaningful to speak to something on the new album. And that made it especially hard I know really for me and Ben especially, but, for me from sort of like a songwriting perspective, just that I always feel like I want to have something really personal to be saying on our records, or else I don't feel like singing the parts. And you know, we were confronted with all this stuff in 2020, especially in the US, where, you know, like there's like these huge racial justice issues coming up and all of these crazy political issues, and just left me sort of grappling with like, you know, what are, do my own inner struggles even matter now in the face of all this global atrocity that's going on? And like, I was really suffering from this sort of feeling of meaninglessness in the face of all of that. Like, what could, you know, like an almost middle-aged white man who's like solidly middle class now possibly have to say right now that anybody needs to hear?
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we started writing Living Pyre, which was the first single for the album, that I really sort of just decided to contend with that directly instead of being afraid of it. And that sort of opened the door to like the rest of the record kind of coming together. Just like that acknowledgement of, you know, like maybe this desperation and this like soul seeking that I feel like I need to do right now to motivate myself to even be a human being anymore is like enough to write a new album about. And so that's sort of what we ended up doing. You know, the first lyrics on that song are, "There's nothing left to give." And like, I really felt like that, you know, at that moment in time. So that was sort of the catalyst for the whole thing.
Yeah. So this pandemic really put life in perspective. You know, it happened with me, and I think happened with everyone, because it's funny you were saying that if your opinion mattered anyway. You know, I've been dealing with that for the last couple of years. You know, it's just been such a struggle that you think like, why I'm going to complain about anything, because there's people that are worse than me. You know, I still have a job, I can still do my work, you know, I can still do what I love, but there's people that they lost, you know, family, they lost their jobs, and why am I complaining? And, you know, and it's been like this last year and a half, 2 years, you know, I really been questioning, you know, not why am I alive, but basically, you know, what's the meaning of all this at the end? Because the last 3 years have been difficult because I lost my dad, you know, 2 years ago before the pandemic. There was some problems after that we had to deal with. Then the pandemic came. Last year in the middle of the pandemic, I had a heart attack. I had to go to a hospital. So, you know, everything in the last like 3 years, I've been just reasoning, you know, what's the purpose? But music is the thing that makes me going, you know, and listening to bands making music and showing that still they have appreciation for the art. You know, it's good enough for me, you know, for someone like you and for you guys. If you guys believe there's still a purpose to make music, there's still a purpose for me to still listen. And, you know, that's, you know, what's really important. But you were talking about writing. Do you tend to get stuck when you're writing a song sometimes that you just want to throw everything away and say like, you know, I give up. I cannot really get past something.
I mean, it happens for sure. Like, and it happened a lot during making this record, you know, because we were trying to write it sort of remotely from each other. There wasn't really the motivation of like the fun aspect of the band where we get together and like play music really loud and like figure out what sounds cool. You know, me and Ben were like writing the whole record by creating Guitar Pro files where it makes like this like, you know, kind of cheesy sounding like fake guitar sound based on like the guitar tab that you're typing into it. And like we were having to use that to communicate our ideas, you know, and it was really like hard to motivate ourselves to keep pushing forward, you know, when it's just not fun. It feels so divorced from like the emotion and the performative aspect of it when you're composing that way. And I mean, there certainly are, you know, a large handful of song ideas that never ended up making the cut, or, you know, lots of like individual parts that maybe we would feel passionate about, but we just couldn't figure out something that we wanted to do with them that felt, you know, greater than like the sum of the parts.
Yeah.
So you know, I don't think we're ever married as much to those ideas that like they have to be on the record. Like, you know, if it's not working, we try to abandon it before we invest too much time.
Yeah.
And just move on. You know, you can't get too emotionally attached to that stuff, or else you're just never going to finish anything.
Is it hard to let go of a guitar riff?
It can be, but sometimes, you know, just like the ghost of that riff will end up materializing itself sometime later, you know, in something. Like maybe you have a cool riff that just doesn't end up working anywhere, but it comes back as like, oh, like the melody of that riff would be interesting as, you know, a guitar melody in this other context, or, you know, or maybe it's just the concept of the riff. Like, oh, I like that riff was sort of like really rhythmic and didn't have like a lot of melody, but then has this like dissonant thing at the end, or, you know, whatever. And then try to just like reformat it and repurpose it later where it makes sense.
Yeah. And, you know, when it comes to like, you were talking about like throwing out ideas and stuff like that. It's, you know, because I remember talking to, I think it was Blackie Lawless of Wasp. And he said that he had, you know, he has like a back catalog of stuff, how the songs evolved, you know, like from, let's say, like the song Animal or whatever other song it was. He said there's like 4 or 5 different versions of that song, all different from what became that classic song. Did you guys have those ideas as well? Like when you were writing, do you have like a back catalog of ideas that you didn't end up using, but that you can reuse again at a later stage?
Kind of. You know, like I was saying that we were working on a Vernal Gate in 2019, and we wrote a whole song around it that's completely different than the song that's actually on the album. So like, but we just decided we didn't like it. Yeah. So it's never going to come out because it's not as good.
You keep those ideas?
No, they're not good enough. You know, like you have to move on from that stuff. For me, like, I'm sure that there's probably somebody out there who would be interested in hearing them, but if we're not interested in hearing them, then what's the point? And we definitely do have, you know, on every album, really what we end up recording is like the material that we prepared all the way. You know, if something's not working, we don't spend the time developing it all the way into a song. Like we don't have that much money to like sit in the studio for months and record like every single thing that comes up and then figure out what we're going to use. Like we're not really that kind of band. So we kind of just try and be efficient with our time and with, you know, our sort of mental energy. You know, nothing that isn't going to be on an album ends up getting lyrics written for it or vocal parts written for it. Like I always wait till the end to do that stuff because that's like really the biggest emotional investment for me. And I'm not going to make it if I don't think it's going to be something that's going to see the light of day.
Yeah. And you were saying that you guys need to be together, you know, normally to write. Did this change the view of Camis as a band when it comes to songwriting process, or you still think that no, you know, when this pandemic is over, we're still going to get together and we're going to keep writing like that together?
I think it's more fun. That's what I would like to do. But, you know, if it doesn't end up being feasible for whatever reason, I think that we can certainly keep working this way and it would work. I think the important thing is that, you know, and we've always kind of proceeded this way where either Ben or I will come up with riff ideas or like a song structure or like a sequence of riffs that we think go together. And we'll use that as the raw material when we get together. Like we don't really often just like jam from nothing and have something come up during practice. I mean, we do that, but it's just like, sounds like Sleep or something. And it's not really like a Chemist song. So in some respects, writing from Guitar Pro that way didn't end up being super different from what we were doing before, except for that it gave us way less time to be sort of refining the songs together. Like we only had maybe 2 months where we were able to get together in a practice studio and like really work through the tracks, and they ended up changing a lot, getting better from that process. So I could see in the future us doing a similar thing potentially, where we work on the songs remotely, sharing ideas with each other, and but then devote like some large amount of time to getting together and making sure they all work, like that the energy is flowing good when we're in a band, when we're playing them together, that the arrangements make sense, that like the transitions are as long or as short as they need to be, you know, all that stuff that ties it together and makes it a cohesive work, like has to be there, and we have to be together in a room to make that happen.
Yeah, because when you write, sometimes you think that the riff or the melody is amazing, but then in the context of the song might not sound, you know, that good. And you need to bounce with the other guys in the room to say like, okay, actually it doesn't work that well.
Yeah. I mean, both Ben and I have had really cool riffs that we just couldn't end up using because they didn't fit. They didn't like help deliver the entirety of a song. You know, there was like, it would be distracting if it was there, or it would just provide like some tangent that doesn't resolve in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah.
And we've sort of realized, I think, that our strength as a band is not necessarily like trying to be the most brutal or dark or like riff centric. We always ensure that every riff is interesting in and of itself. But we're really more of a song oriented band, like where each song has to take you on a journey and has to make sense, or else it's not going to be a Khemmis song. So, you know, oftentimes that means that we can have like a really cool riff that might be cooler than any riff that's in that song, but it just doesn't end up making sense. It doesn't like add anything because it's just, you know, it's just like a separate thing.
And just putting riffs because of being a riff, it doesn't mean it's a good, you know, it's a good thing in the end. And you know, you were talking about you know, the depression and everything that I think probably a lot of the people went through in these last couple of years. Did that reflect in the lyrics as well at the end?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's our darkest album, both sonically and lyrically so far. And, you know, really the album like directly contends with kind of each of the things that, at least that I tell myself is true about who I am, but that like upon closer inspection doesn't benefit me. That's kind of an abstract concept, but that's really what the whole album is about. Like, you know, is this belief that I'm expected to be a certain way because of like other things that have happened in my life or things that I might have regret over? Do those things define me, or like, am I greater than that? Or like, is this thing that happened like something that I'm even remembering correctly? Or is this just like another story that I'm telling myself about who I am? And a lot of this really just came from, you know, as a way of like trying to deal with all the depression that I was dealing with. I really, for the first time in my life, started to develop a self-compassion practice where I would just sit with myself and try to tell myself that I love myself, or that like there's something good about me. And that can be a really difficult thing to do. And, you know, only really from working from that place did I start to develop an appreciation for like who I truly am beyond what I tell myself my worth comes from. And that, you know, that ended up just being like the concept for the whole album, basically. So really the whole album is to some degree about depression and trying to work your way out of it. But really it's about like these various unique sort of mind tricks that we play on ourselves that play into stuff like what you suffer from with depression. And not until the very end of the album do you really get like a light at the end of the tunnel. You know, it's like at the very last moment on the album, like you're reaffirming your will to live. But the whole rest of the album is like depressing as fuck, you know, like, and we kind of wanted it to be that way. Like in the past, I think we've tried to deliver an optimistic turn to every song that is really dark, but we've kind of purposefully like tried to make this album not give you that satisfaction. until the entire album is resolved.
Isn't it amazing that something as dark as depression is turns out into something beautiful in music? Isn't like just kind of a weird thing?
It really is. I mean, I think that it's really true. And this is something that like I sort of tried to illustrate with the lyrics on the last song, is like something that I've realized through being in this band is that by like giving yourself the freedom to be vulnerable with these kinds of emotions, you end up relating so much to other people that deal with the same problems. If you're like the listener and you're hearing somebody express this, and that like breaking down of your walls, you know, like not everything is okay, and I'm going to talk about it. You know, sort of like acknowledging that you're broken and like everyone else is too, and that like through like it's really like those cracks that you create in your like wall that you have up that end up making it easier to relate to each other and to, you know, find the good in things. And so like I see kind of part of my mission in this life now as trying to you know, make myself as vulnerable as I feel like I really reasonably can, while still kind of protecting myself, but to where like hopefully it's just opening other people's hearts and we're able to sort of relate about something, even if it is dark and really horrible. You know, sort of letting that light in ends up making the world a little bit of a better place.
Yeah. You know, I had to go to a psychologist years ago because I had this wall that I couldn't get rid of. And, you know, it was a very difficult, and it's something that I really can't explain in a way why that wall was there, but was to protect myself. So I was always really this tough guy, you know, pretending to be a tough guy.
Mm-hmm.
And behind that wall, I was crumbling like I don't know what. And only when I went to the psychologist, that part of that wall came down, and I was able to say like, you know, it's okay to feel down, to cry and everything. And, you know, it's not bad to show emotion. And it was something that was very difficult for me to do. Yeah. And when you learn to do that, it's all good.
Yeah.
It turns out to be good. And, you know, one of the things I appreciate about Camis as well is the artwork. And Sam Turner, great job on this artwork. Tell me a bit about the artwork, because it's just phenomenal.
Yeah, thank you. You know, Sam is always awesome and is always exceeding expectations for these things. I always work really closely with him on the album art because I want it to tell a story that's independent of the music, enough that like, even if that's the only thing you can enjoy about the album, it's still satisfying. And I want like all the albums to sort of tie together in some kind of way that's abstract enough that people can read into it whatever story they want, but one that's like clear enough to me that like I can put some kind of logical direction on like how they relate to each other. And for this album, like, you know, I had this concept that the other guys in the band all liked, and I drew sort of a sketch of it. And, you know, basically it was like the central figure wading through like the river Styx, or could be any of the other rivers in hell. So he's kind of in this purgatory, and his like reflection in the water is literally like an expression of his darkest fears. So, you know, like literally a demon, but it's his reflection and it's reaching out and dragging him under. And so that was like the concept that I gave to Sam, and he loved it and then sort of ran with it and, you know, made it a lot better like than what I had originally sort of sketched out. But, you know, it's the same general image. And I think that it's a powerful image because it resonates really deeply with the album theme and the song lyrics too. Like, you know, they're just reinforcing each other. And I always like it when you can gain more meaning from the visual thing you can from just like the words and the music alone. And I think one thing that he especially nailed with this one is like we were trying to get the look of the central guy right, and it just like wasn't there. And so I ended up writing like an entire short story for him about like just like who this figure is and like what part of their life this is and how it relates to the other album covers, because it's like one of those figures, but it's not like really obvious who it is. And so like through this backstory, then he like perfectly encapsulated what the character was supposed to look like. And the expression on the guy as he's being like dragged into the water is just like this perfect mixture of like being resigned to what's happening, inviting what's happening, and not caring about what's happening. And like, I thought that was really important to get that like ambiguity right. That, you know, kind of we're sort of as people, when we're being dragged under by our own sort of personal demons, like we're always some combination of those three things, you know? And so, yeah, I think it ends up just perfectly illustrating that. And the actual art looks so much better in person. Like if you get the record, you know, you have a huge 12-inch version of it and it looks awesome compared to what you see on a computer.
Yeah, that's the thing, because they say never judge the book by the cover, but I want to get that book just for the cover alone, you know. It's just one of those things. You know, I just want to have that because it looks so nice. You know, it's like it fits well on a wall if you put like a frame around it. You know, it's great. And you won't say that there's a record behind it or anything, but that's the great thing, you know, because I was seeing the artworks and it was like, you know, they say never judge a book by the cover, but I'm going to judge this.
You kind of can,
And you know, another thing before we wrap up, it's you guys like to do covers a lot, and you did quite a few a couple of them at least during this pandemic. Have you ever thought of just a covers album, or is there any cover song that you have in the can that no one will see coming? You know, very unexpected. Is there anything like that planned?
I'll say that we recorded another one when we recorded Deceiver in that same session that we haven't told anybody about yet. And
you won't tell me.
Unfortunately I won't. I will say that it's like, it's not a popular song. Like it's another like old folk song, like a standard, you know, that the copyright doesn't really exist for or anything. So it's another like old American folk song that we do a rendition of. And I think we just like the challenge of like reinterpreting somebody else's work, especially if it's something that's the arrangement is really spare, because we can kind of do whatever we want with it. And so like this kind of old folk music like is really well suited to that, because it's often just like some guitar chords and a voice at the most. So, you know, you can reinterpret that in so many ways. But, you know, in the past, we've also done like covers by, you know, like ZZ Top and Motorhead and, you know, other bands just live. And it would be fun to like record all of that and maybe some other new ones eventually at some point for a covers record. But, you know, there's not a whole lot of motivation because you have to pay all the royalties to people that wrote the songs. So, you know, if it happens, it happens, but I'm probably not going to like seek out, you know, paying a bunch of money to go in the studio and record those.
And Phil, just to finish, touring plans for Europe, is there anything planned so far for 2022?
Nothing definite. We're working on it right now, though. We just hired a manager who's sort of already helping us a lot with some stuff, and we're working on dates. We're planning to be over there in 2022. So hopefully we'll see you then.
Yes. All right, Phil, thank you very much for your time. You know, all the best for Deceiver. Love the records. Looking forward to see you guys on stage and get this pandemic behind us and just move on.
For sure, man. hey, come out to the show and say hi and introduce yourself if you get a chance.
Right.
I'd love to meet you and have a beer or something.
Yes, I won't drink alcohol because of the heart, but you know, whatever, I can drink anything else.
That's fine. Yeah.
All right. Hope to see you soon, Phil. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.